Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty wild theory, one that pulls from ancient prophecies, spiritual texts, and even modern technology to ask a huge question. Is all the chaos in history really just random, or are we all living on some kind of hidden cosmic schedule? Let's get into it. So, yeah, that's the big question right there. Are the massive plagues, the world-changing wars, all the collapses we read about in history books, are they just a string of bad luck? Or could they actually be part of a much larger, predictable rhythm? Well, this theory argues it's definitely the latter. So, where do you even start with a theory like this? Well, the foundation is built on one of the most powerful and frankly terrifying symbols of crisis out there, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Think of them as the original blueprint for total catastrophe. I mean, look at this image. It's drawn from the biblical book of Revelation, and for centuries it has absolutely captivated and terrified the human imagination. But it's way more than just a scary story. It's like a symbolic map of the fundamental forces that can totally upend civilization, representing this moment of divine judgment and the violent end of an era. And what's really fascinating here is just how specific each of these roles are. You've got the rider on the white horse, who a lot of people interpret as conquest, or even the Antichrist setting out to take over. Then the red horse arrives, bringing war and bloodshed. The black horse, holding those scales, signals a time of famine where food is scarce. And finally, the pale horse, whose rider is literally named Death, comes to unleash plague and sickness. These aren't just vague problems, they're very distinct kinds of crisis. Okay, so you have these ancient symbols, but how in the world do they connect to some kind of predictable schedule? This is where the theory introduces what it calls two distinct, overlapping cycles, patterns that have been hiding in plain sight throughout history, ticking away like a giant cosmic clock. On one hand, you've got the Chiron cycle. It's a shorter, roughly 50-year rhythm of what's called a periodic cleansing, basically a generational reset button that gets hit through things like pandemics and major wars. And then, you've got this absolute monster of a cycle, the 12,000-year Capella cycle. This one supposedly governs the rise and fall of entire civilizations, marking these colossal shifts or complete resets. So let's look at that shorter Chiron cycle, because when you lay out the dates, it's pretty striking. The sources point to the 1918 Spanish flu. Then, about 50 years later, you get 1968, a year that saw both the Hong Kong flu pandemic and massive social revolutions all over the world. Fast forward another 52 years from that, and you land right on 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic. The pattern points to a huge societal shock about once every 2 generations. Now, the Capella cycle? That's playing in a completely different league. It's actually a lot like other ancient ideas about world ages, like the Hindu Yugas or the Platonic Great Year, which also talk about these huge, long cycles of civilization rising and falling. This cycle is said to mark truly monumental shifts, the end of the last ice age, which lines up with great flood myths, the sudden appearance of advanced civilizations like Egypt and Sumer, and that massive spiritual turning point around the time of Christ. And the theory claims that we are living inside one of these massive transitions right now. But here's where it gets really, really mind-bending. These cosmic cycles aren't just random timers for disaster. According to this theory, they are specific tests for a very specific type of human soul, one that's defined by a powerful, reoccurring story, and that is the story of the exile. The theory proposes something pretty radical here. It suggests that if you look at the biblical story of the fallen angels, and then you look at this narrative from Spiritism about souls exiled from the Capella star system, and you even look at the mythological story of the descendants of Cain, what if they're not separate stories? What if they are all just different cultures telling the exact same core story, the story of the exile? And this is the unified profile that emerges. It describes a group of beings who are incredibly advanced, maybe technologically or intellectually, but their moral and spiritual sides just couldn't keep up. Their pride, their ambition, it got them into trouble, and they were basically banished to a lower plane, that's us, Earth, to go through a very long, very difficult school of learning things like humility and compassion. And this idea completely flips the script on something like the Curse of Cain. Drawing from the spirit of Hermann Hesse's novel Damien, the Fury suggests that this mark isn't a brand of shame for being evil. Not at all. It's actually a sign that you're different, that you're a force for change, someone who questions things, who challenges the status quo, and who pushes evolution forward, even if it gets you kicked out of the club. So let's bring this all together, because according to this unified theory, Every single one of these threads, the cosmic cycles, the four horsemen, this whole exile story, they are all converging and crashing together in the era we're living through right now. And across the various sources, one single critical year keeps popping up over and over again as the focal point, the potential finish line for this chaotic transition we're in, 2045. So why 2045? Of all the years, why that one? Well, this is where the mystical meets the digital. That exact date was famously predicted by the futurist Ray Kurzweil as the year we are most likely to reach the technological singularity. That's the hypothetical moment when artificial intelligence surpasses all human intelligence combined, triggering changes to our world that we can't even begin to imagine. And leading up to that 2045 milestone, the theory claims our current era, especially this window between 2025 and 2032, is showing all the classic signs of a horseman phase. And it's not just from one tradition, it's a convergence of prophecies, from Tibetan to Hindu to biblical sources. They all seem to point to this period of intense geopolitical tension, crazy natural disasters, and societal breakdown that sounds an awful lot like those four horsemen going for a ride. So, okay, does this all just point to some final destructive doom and gloom ending for humanity? Well, the theory says, not so fast. To get the real picture, we need to look at the true original meaning of that very loaded word, apocalypse. You see, when we hear the word apocalypse, we immediately think end of the world, right? Fire, brimstone, the whole deal. But the word itself from the original Greek apocalypsis literally means an unveiling or a revelation. It's the moment the curtain gets pulled back and the truth that was hidden is finally exposed for everyone to see. So instead of thinking about it as a one-time final event, the sources frame apocalypse as a recurring pattern, a cycle that happens over and over in history. First, you get the crisis and chaos as the old system starts to break down. That's the horsemen arriving. That chaos forces a great revelation, an unveiling, where we all face a collective test. And then, from the ashes of that test, comes the chance for renewal, for a rebirth into a new world. And that leaves us with one final, huge question to think about. After weaving all of these different threads together, have we actually uncovered a literal map of the future? A genuine prophecy? Or is this a powerful modern myth? A story that gives us a new and powerful language to understand the incredibly chaotic and transformative times we're all living through right now? Ultimately, I suppose that's the real revelation for you to decide.